Hey, welcome to Root Family Podcast, where we can draw families closer to God by going deeper in what He's really saying in His scriptures, in and through us.
Hey, all my Root families. We are doing something very special today. I had an amazing conversation with Michayla White just the other day. It was so good on honoring the Sabbath and how Christian families and Christian homes can make this a reality in their own lives and step into the fullness that is waiting there for them in the Sabbath. And some of I know you're already thinking, the Sabbath, is that something I really need to dive into, or just wait? This has to be one of my all-time favorite conversations I have had in a really, really long time. Now, Michayla White, for those of you who don't know her, she is a leader, one of the main leaders at INCM, a children's ministry organization. She is a mom of 2 kids, and she is a Jewish Christian. Her dad became a Christian and introduced her while growing up into the feasts and the Sabbath. And the results are just fantastic. You are going to love this podcast. All right, let's jump in now into my conversation with Michayla White. So I have Michayla White here. She is a director at INCM. That's a children's ministry company, for those of you who don't know. And she's also a mom of 2. So Michayla, say hi.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to get to be here with you.
So Michayla, the reason she's doing this podcast with us is honestly because of Pastor Kate. Every Friday, she shows me another table setting that Michayla has done for her family to enjoy a Sabbath meal together. And so I got to ask you on this, is this something that you did before you had kids and they were drafted into it? Or is this something that you realized the importance of once you had kids to begin doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think one of the things that would help illuminate the answer for that is just sharing that I'm actually a Jewish believer in Jesus. So my father trusted in Jesus as the Messiah when he was in his 20s and married my mom. And so he actually did the pioneering work of what it looks like to be a Jewish man that believes in Yeshua the Messiah and what that looks like in everyday life. And so I had the privilege of growing up as a second generation Jewish believer. And so, yeah, Sabbath was a part of our lives growing up. But one of the things that I am so grateful for about my parents is that they told me the truth, and they loved me, and they created environments for me to grow in my spiritual walk. They weren't perfect, but they were amazing, and gave me freedom to make choices. And so definitely went through a period of time where I felt like I could do without Sabbath, which was a complete mistake. And so, my husband and I decided for our home, we're going to prioritize time, prioritize that day, and honor the Sabbath. And it's been a part of the way that we've raised our boys. And so it's a regular rhythm. Every week we approach Sabbath with delight and excitement.
Yeah. So your boys don't know anything different. So they grew up, and so now, do they look forward to this Sabbath meal all together?
They do. It's kind of amazing. It was one of those things where, as a mom of 2 very active boys, of how is this going to go really as they get older? But, in the same way that we build anticipation and excitement for things like birthdays or things like Christmas, we can build anticipation and excitement for a day that's set apart to be with God and know the Lord. And so we do specific things, throughout our week and incorporate into our conversation with our boys that help nurture that delight and excitement for Sabbath. and they pick it up on their own. So they're excited about what they're going to eat on Friday night. They're excited
Yeah.
about, what it looks like for us to have an entire day together with no work, and enjoying one another and enjoying what God's given us. And so sometimes they'll wake up on Tuesday and be like, is it Sabbath? I wish. But no, it's Tuesday.
That's funny. So for those that aren't aware of what a Sabbath meal really is even, could you give me a quick rundown for our parents?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the meal is a component of our Sabbath. So we begin Sabbath Friday at sundown and observe until Saturday at sundown. So a
Yeah.
full 24-hour period of time. But we welcome the Sabbath with a celebration. So that Friday evening meal is kind of like a line of demarcation in our week. It's where we're putting a line in the sand of this day is different from all of these other days. And that's really the meaning of holiness, right? The opposite of holiness isn't evil, it's just normal. And so, so the Sabbath being something that's very special and set apart for God, we welcome that with a celebratory meal. So, one of the ways that we help build anticipation in our kids for that is, what do you want to eat on Friday night for Sabbath? What feels, like a party to you? And sometimes it's we want to grill hot dogs and burgers and sit around the fire outside, or sometimes they want something more elaborate. Granted, they're 6 and 4, so the expectations are
still low. Nice.
Are a little low. So I appreciate that. But one of the things that we've included are in Jewish culture are some beautiful opportunities that this meal creates to bless the Lord, to bless our children. My husband blesses me. We bless the day. And so some of those elements that we include as the kiddush, which is grape juice, and simply reminds us that the Lord is the provider and source of all life. And typically we'll have challah bread, but sometimes if I'm out of challah bread, I'm going to be honest, I use goldfish or graham crackers, whatever we have available. And it reminds us that the Lord is our sustainer and that Jesus the Messiah is the bread of life. And so we thank him for providing these things for us. And we set apart this day to know him and worship him and love him. So that allows us to and I didn't realize how important the consistency of that meal and those blessings would be for almost the switches to flip in our boys' brains that this time has now begun and it's different.
Yeah.
And so just the way that helps us to remind ourselves that, I think we can't discount the way that helps our children to understand, no, this is a special time where we delight in the Lord and we delight in one another and we enjoy what we have and we don't strive after anything. Right.
Yeah, that is so important. And then, so let me just ask for any parents that would be overwhelmed at the thought of this. What would you suggest if they wanted to just start something special? Because I feel like meal times, if you look in the Bible, meal times are so important. It's all through that. Even the verse that everybody can quote about, behold, I stand at the door and knock, that you may open the door, and that's where people stop. And it's that he may come in and eat with you. Like that's the door is just the passageway to get to the goal of sharing a meal with you. And so meal times are so important. And yet for families, adding something in special to the meal time, we know that it's important, but it's not urgent in any way. And for a lot of parents, they may even say, trying to add something in would be inconvenient. And I'm scared at the thought of trying something and doing an epic fail. And my parent or my kids are like, don't do that again. I don't understand what you're trying to do. It took too long or whatever. Can you just speak into that for a second?
Absolutely. Well, first I want to dispel any myths that like we have mealtime and discipleship figured out for our children. I mean, we're just doing the best that we can. We have plenty of meals around the island countertop in our home that don't feel like lingering, savoring experiences. So I just want to,
Okay.
I want to put that out
Okay.
there first. So I'm normal. Okay.
Yeah.
But
We're not, for the parents that are thinking now,
yeah,
I'm thinking it's a 3-hour meal time. That's not what we're talking
no,
about. No, good.
no.
Right.
So, and also just thinking through, like, this is one day out of the week. When we're talking about Sabbath, for us, it's just Friday evening, that one day. And, one of the things that I would encourage for those who are feeling like, it feels awkward, and what if I fail at it? One of the things that stands out to me so much, I was actually listening to a talk this week that said, we won't live to regret the things that we failed at. We will live to regret the things we thought to do but never did.
Yeah, that's so
And
good.
and that really stands out to me when it comes to the spiritual formation of our children, of the things that I'm opting out of because I feel unsure of or uncomfortable about, or what if I fail at it? It's much better to just begin
Mm-hmm.
and to start somewhere, and maybe do it poorly or do it awkwardly, but to at least have done it.
Yes.
And I think we also can't discount the fact that even though our kids might, I don't know, I have younger kids, but I'm sure if your kids are older, they might think it's weird, or, I don't know, not be super engaged. But I also don't think we can discount the fact that our kids do want that focused time, and they do want that attention.
Yeah.
And to give our kids spiritual attention in this culture, in the current environment they're growing up in, I think is more important than ever. And Sabbath just has given our family that consistent, regular rhythm of gathering around the table, looking one another in the eye, blessing each other, blessing each other. That's so powerful. Blessing the Lord and blessing this day, and committing to that time together of what it looks like to know the Lord, and to create a period of time that's different from the rest of the week. And so, you don't have to overcomplicate things. It can be very simple. What might feel celebratory to your family could be a pizza and some popcorn and just having a simple night around the table. But what does it look like to make that intentional? You could maybe before the meal starts, pray over your children, pray the Aaronic benediction over your children. That's a beautiful, simple blessing that you can pray over your children. My husband, one of the blessings that is traditional in how I grew up is the Eshet Chayil, and it's the woman of valor, and it's basically a blessing that comes out of Proverbs 31. And how amazing for my sons to grow up hearing my husband pray, bless me as Eshet Chayil, and think about how that's going to impact the way they see their future spouses. So we can't discount the way that those simple prayers and blessings will have a generational impact on our children.
Can you tell me a time that your kids, or reflecting back at raising your kids, can you tell me about a time that was just a super special one that you're comfortable with sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. It happened this spring. So one of the things that really is special about the Sabbath is that, a lot of people think that Jesus canceled the Sabbath, that he was down on the Sabbath. He got into so many arguments about the Sabbath. And it's true, he did get into so many arguments about the Sabbath, but it was because he was wanting to communicate to the Pharisees that they had missed something critically important about the Sabbath. And that was, and he proved this with the Bible, that with Hebrew scripture, that the alleviation of human suffering and acts of mercy trump the Sabbath. And because that's reflective of God's heart. The Sabbath reflects the kingdom of God. So if there's an aspect that's not whole or is in pain, then it is okay on the Sabbath to heal, to alleviate suffering, to show acts of compassion and mercy. And so that was the main source of Jesus' argument with the Pharisees about Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that looks today, and what we've taught our sons, is if you have the opportunity on the Sabbath, if you notice anything on the Sabbath where there's an opportunity for you to alleviate suffering or to show compassion or show mercy, our rabbi Jesus would tell you that that's your responsibility as his disciple to enter into.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure how much my children were getting it, right? They're 6 and 4. Okay.
Right,
So
right.
again, appropriate expectations. So one morning we walk out onto the driveway. It had just poured the night before. And this is disgusting, but there were all these worms all over our driveway from the rain. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is gross. And Declan's like, my 6-year-old is looking around and he goes, Mom, he goes, what happened? And I was like, well, the rains came, and he's like, well, what's going to happen to them? And I was like, well, they'll probably die when the sun comes out, And he goes, well, it's the Sabbath. We have to rescue them.
That's awesome.
And just, I can't even begin to tell you what that did in my heart, where it's like, I didn't even see it. My son, my 6-year-old looked at this and saw, to be compassionate and merciful in this moment would be to rescue all of these worms.
Yeah.
And as silly as that sounds, what it showed is that he's paying attention.
Yeah. Yeah. He's applying it to the world around him. The truths that are being taught at the table, even if they're not, like we all know, our kids will hear something 100 times and then still seem like they're not engaging with it in any way. And really they are. Now, that's one of the things I love about children's ministry. It's like long-term investing in the financial world. You're not going to see the 100%. Kids coming back in the next week and they'll have these massive spiritual gains, but you'll watch them and they'll skip out a lot of the heartache of their teenage or college years because of the groundedness that was poured into them at a young age, and parents even on top of that.
Absolutely.
I like my stats. And so if you look at the numbers, hours that a children's church can pour into your kids versus parents, it's astronomically different. And so we can do little things like having a Sabbath meal, planning a time every week for our families to get together and not just even share a meal, but to learn how to pour into others.
That's right.
I mean, if they can learn that at a young age, or even for those of you that have teenagers, learn to do it at that time, it's gonna launch them into another. How do I say this? They'll be able to live more like Jesus as they grow.
That's right. I think part of our responsibility is to help them notice the way that God is at work in them and in the world around them. And it can be simple things like, hey, man, this watermelon that we're eating, it is so delicious. Like, can you believe the creativity of God in making this amazing fruit for us to enjoy? What are some of the other things that you notice in creation that speak to the creativity of God? Or, one of the things that we'll do on Sabbath, this is a little different because of COVID, but we've gone on drives together. Like we drove down to the city of Chicago and drove around and just asked our boys, like, notice, like, what are the things that you can be praying for in our city? We're supposed to pray for the flourishing of our city and for the healing of our city. And so what are the things that you're noticing around you that you can pray for? What are the things that God's stirring in your heart about what you're seeing? And so asking those questions, they might have a profound answer. They might not. But the important thing is that you're getting them to tune their attention towards it. And And that's really one of the things we try to prioritize in our Sabbath meal conversation and throughout the rest of the day are those
Yeah.
questions that tune their attention to the way that God is at work and what he's created and what he's doing in his world.
That is awesome. So I want to go into that a little bit more, because really the Sabbath meal is like the kickoff of this 24 hours of family time, basically. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, go ahead.
Yeah, it's for us, it's 24 hours that we set aside to know the Lord, to worship the Lord, to rest, and to delight in what he's done and what he's given us. So we don't work on the Sabbath. We don't strive or create anything on the Sabbath. We don't accumulate. The only thing we buy on the Sabbath is donuts. So that's an important part of our Sabbath routine.
Yeah, especially with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old.
That's right. Absolutely. Donuts matter. So, that 24-hour period. And I think it's important for people to know, like, it's not utopia with a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. Like we're not sitting around quietly reading books and listening to music all day long. It's quite the contrary. But I think as a parent, you just have to be mindful of what does it look like on this day for us to help our children enjoy God, notice him at work, to be at rest, for them to be at rest. Because I think that's something we don't really take into account, is that our kids, though they might not be working, they do have things they're striving after and things they have to achieve and things that worry them and that weigh on them. And so what does it look like for us to carve out a space in the week for them to be at rest and to experience peace and to cease striving? That's really what we're after in that 24-hour period.
Yeah, I love that, because you find, well, I would say in the American culture, typically there's always a striving to rest at the wrong times. At least that's how I see it. And so you fill up your off days with a Saturday or a Sunday where you're running around, spending all day trying to punch through your at-home to-do list and your grocery shopping, and you're throwing the kids in the car and you're running here and there and everywhere, and there's no real rest in any part of that. And then even vacation times are like that, where it's just like go, 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 go. And so a lot of families have never really learned the art of rest. And yet there's so much healing, so much reorientation into things that really are valuable or have long-term results by having that day of rest. And so can you speak into that for just a second, for the families that maybe their Saturdays are packed out and their Sundays are pretty full, and they try to carve out a hour or two with the kids on a Monday or Tuesday evening, but really it just looks like sitting down and watching Netflix on a show that they all can agree on, and that's their downtime with their families.
Sure.
Can you speak into that? Because I think there's a high level of importance, but when we don't see the results lived out in front of very many people, we don't feel the pressure or the buildup within us to be able to take that on and make that change. Absolutely.
Oh, I love this question. So I'm going to start with Jesus and go back to Genesis and then end up back at Jesus. So Jesus, his primary teaching was to seek first the kingdom of God, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you.
Yes.
That was his primary message, his clarion call to the people of the day: seek first my kingdom. So if we back up to Genesis 1, and God knits into the fabric of time this day, where he rests. The Hebrew word there is Shabbat, which means he literally stopped and ceased, and that was set in time. But what's fascinating is that God blessed three things in Genesis 1 and 2. He blessed the animals, be fruitful, multiply. He blessed humans, be fruitful, multiply. He blessed the Sabbath day, which would say that the Sabbath day has the ability to add life to the world.
That is awesome.
But the thing that he set aside as holy was one thing, and that was the Sabbath day. Now, again, I think our world has such a interesting view of holiness. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. The opposite of holy isn't necessarily evil. It's just normal, mundane.
Yep.
And so something that's holy is set apart for the Lord. So out of 7 days of a week, 6 are normal, ordinary, for regular work and operating, but one day, one glorious day, is set apart as holy for the Lord and blessed. If you fast forward to Exodus, and the people of Israel have been enslaved for 430 years. Think about the generations of people who experienced slavery for 430 years. As a slave, you do not get time. You don't get your own calendar. You certainly don't get rest as a slave. But when God calls his people out of Egypt, even before he gave them the law, he gave them time. And he gave them calendar. And he gave them the Sabbath, because free people get to rest. So when I am struggling with resting, and when I'm struggling with stopping my work and stopping that achievement monster, I have to ask myself what I'm captive to, what I'm enslaved to, because free people get to rest. So then it's codified in the law. And at Mount Sinai, it's because I think God knew we would struggle to rest. It's codified in the law. And you see from then on out the way that Sabbath is talked about as representative of the kingdom. Isaiah often talks about how in the kingdom, from Sabbath to Sabbath, we will come before the Lord and worship the King. And so all of the rabbis, Jesus himself, reference the Sabbath as a representation of the kingdom of God. So what that would say then, and Hebrews talks about this, that there's a Sabbath rest for us. There is our eternal kingdom rest, but the Sabbath is the representation, the glimpse of eternity. And so one of the things that stands out to me, I'm so thankful that Sabbath is kind of getting its day in the sun as a spiritual practice. I feel like it's kind of having a little bit of a renaissance in terms of conversation in the church. But the thing that I think we have to show caution on is that packaging Sabbath as a spiritual practice that supports our self-care is to dramatically cheapen the point. And it's not sufficient enough for me to incorporate it into my life as a habit if the only thing that it offers is self-care. However, if Sabbath, week in, week out, gives me a glimpse of eternity and helps me hold on to and grab on to what my heavenly citizenship looks like and anchors my hope in a coming kingdom, that's enough for me to incorporate it into my life as a habit and to want to deposit that into my children, because goodness knows my kids need to get a glimpse of eternity each week to sustain what this world is going to press on them. So the reason our family follows Sabbath is not just because it's restorative and not just because it's a beautiful practice and not just because we need that time together. The reason that we practice Sabbath is because we actually desperately believe we need that glimpse of eternity each week to be rooted and strengthened as disciples of Jesus and to remember what we're actually citizens of. So
that is awesome. I love that, because that's what I was trying to get to, is that it's not just another good idea to add on to your plate, or it's the new popular thing, and so we're gonna we're going to add this on to our overly busy schedule without really grasping the depth that is all of Christianity from the very beginning. God has ordained this to be part of our lives. And just because it's countercultural doesn't mean that it's wrong, or even that we have to reinvent it so we can fit it into our lives. But instead, we need to catch what God desires to do through us to raise up these kids that God has entrusted with us, and to be able to connect with him authentically.
That's right.
On a day.
Yeah.
So, all right. Last thoughts from you before we end this. I think we could go and talk about this for like another hour, but I think people would turn us. Well, maybe they probably would actually listen, because this has been so good. It's been so good.
I think I want to just speak to the parent who is maybe a little bit overwhelmed by what week to week life looks like right now, even in the midst of COVID, when things have slowed down, quote unquote. I'm doing air quotes for those who are just listening. That I think we really have to evaluate, as disciples of Jesus, as parents, if our schedule is so compressed, and if the things that we're fitting in are so numerous that we are struggling to carve out that time to be with God. And that's his number one desire, is that we would be in his presence. Then I would say that we should really seriously evaluate the things that we're prioritizing. And it's going to probably lead to some hard no's. And saying no to some good things, so that we can say yes to truly great things as disciples of Jesus and parents. So I think we have to be willing to sacrifice some things that we really like, or sacrifice some things that are pretty good, and to resist the temptation to form Sabbath into my image. And I think that in life, one of the number one temptations we will have to fight against as those who know and love Jesus is the temptation to form this discipleship journey into our image. Recognize that will be insufficient, and what he has set in front of us is good, and it is life, and it is the water that is free and flowing and satisfying that we get to drink from. So we shouldn't trade that for other things. So I say that recognizing how hard it is to say no to certain things in order to say yes to this time with the Lord and with our families. But it is worth it. It's worth it. I don't think in 10 years we will regret those things we said no to, so we could say yes to that time with the Lord and with our families.
Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's wrong or not valuable. It's a lot of times stepping into the uncomfortable things with God is going to illuminate a new way of life that is so much better than what we've been living. In reality, I mean, you look at John 10:10 says that he's come to give us life and life abundantly. And if you ask you ask the most Christians, they would say their life is abundant in to-dos. They'd say their life is abundant in scheduling conflicts because there's too much on there. But they wouldn't be able to look back at their life, oops, I'm hitting my microphone, and say, I am having a full, wonderful life. And if that's not true for you, then take the time to evaluate this with God. Say, God, am I missing something by not having this be a regular part of my family's experience every week? Doing what I need to do to be able to set aside that time to take a Sabbath rest, to focus on my family and focus on him. And it's so worth it. Well, Michayla, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an amazing podcast. I would love for those of you that have been really touched by this, hunt Michayla down on Facebook. Michayla, thank you so much for joining me, and we will see everyone else on the next podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, wasn't that so good? I just wanted to keep that conversation going. There is so much life and so much truth being revealed about who God is through these things. Now, if you're like me, you're like, okay, I need to know more. I want to go more in depth and really have someone like Michayla White walk me through all of these things so I can set this up and do it right. Well, you are in luck. In my conversation with Michayla White after we stopped the recording, she offered to take us all through a course where she shows us how to set the table and what the importance of the juice is and what the importance of the bread is and how to speak blessings over one another and where to even look in the Bible for these blessings and answer questions and more. If you are interested in that, shoot us an email at info@rootbible.com with the subject line Sabbath, and you'll get more information, the details as we release them, about this amazing class that Michayla White's going to teach us all how to do it. And it's going to be so much better than you even think. All right. Well, that is it for us for this week. Thank you all for joining this podcast. It was such a treat to connect with her. And next week, pick it up again. We're launching into a new course in Root Bible Academy called Faith. It's going to look like the kids are jumping in to the class and then watching me play a video games, but there's so many truths that are going to be revealed to us, and we all know our kids love watching others play video games. I personally don't get it, but they love it, and so this is going to be a fun way to train them. If your kids love video games and are not signed up for Root yet, then sign them up today so they can jump in from the very first class where we're diving into the first level, and it is going to be an amazing time learning about steps to faith through the Word. All right, that's it for me. I got to let you all go. Thanks for joining me on this podcast, and we'll talk next week.